two things that maybe another day, probably tomorrow, I speak a little bit more about, that are very, very common. So just say it now so that when you experience it, don't think you did something wrong, or don't think this is because you practice at home. No, it's very, very normal. And one is what is called the so-called difficulty of what is called sloth and torpor. Sloth and torpor is an English word which is not usually used, but sloth means it's an animal that is moving very little and that is very lazy. It is said it goes only down from the tree when it goes to the toilet. Otherwise, it's on the tree, it's sleeping. Even someone said, if you shoot in the direction, not exactly at the sloth, but in the direction of the sloth, it not even turns its head. It's very lazy. So sloth and torpor, torpor is easy to understand for Italians because there is this Italian word torpore. Yeah, so you can get a sense of it. So, and that, I think it happens when it happens because of several reasons. And one reason is that sometimes we are now we're turning inwards, and there is maybe not so much input. There is just the sensations, there's just this breathing, there is not so much like when you watch a TV show or something that keeps you awake. So it takes some time to adjust the mind and the observing mind to this seemingly not so much happening. And so easily it can be that it goes first on this sleepy side. So that's just one answer that I gave myself why this happens. I don't really have the answer. I just know it's very common and very normal. So if you experience that, don't think something is wrong or you don't do something wrong. That's just seemingly part of the practice. Sometimes it's stronger, sometimes less. Important is, can you even find interest in that? How does it manifest? How does it manifest in the body? How does it manifest in the mind? What kind of thoughts are arising? Is it more images, dreamlike thoughts, or is it a lot of other kind of thoughts? One may open the eyes, one may stand up, one may do walking meditation back, forward, or even backward. But sometimes this all doesn't help. So we have to see what is the minimum one can do. And there was one lady once in a retreat. At some point, after 1 day or 2 days of this sloth and torpor, she said to herself, what is the minimum I can do? And what she did, her answer was, the minimum I can do is I can sit until the bell goes. I can't be with the breath, I can't be really awake, but I can sit until the bell goes. And just allowing her that, she said, it loosened something up. It was not fighting with it. And then, of course, with the time, things also disappear, so it's changing. Another difficulty that arises sometimes in the beginning is the opposite, it's restlessness. That people get quite restless and there are so many thoughts, and they and also the mind jumps, and even outwardly one sees suddenly so many things and looks here and looks there. Give it some time. What is here helpful is not to have too many objects. As good as possible, have few objects to be with. And also to try to restrain the senses a bit. So not following each and every impulse to look at this, to look at that, to pass by, to do this, to do that. And then with the time it can recede, but again here one needs to be patient. Sometimes a walk may help for both, even a brisk walk. But here again, it's not about fighting it, but just to know, oh, meditators before me have experienced it. And they have experienced it 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago, at the time of the Buddha. It's nothing what you have to take so personally. But still continue with the sitting and the walking practice as good as possible. Now, another difficulty, and that's a special difficulty or challenge, I would say, is to practice at home. And for some of you, there are very simple conditions at home, and for others, it's more complicated conditions at home. Some of you are able to do something like a full retreat, and some do need to have some interactions with people who are in the house. So here we have to be flexible. We maybe have even to be aware that this retreat is not the same like it is in a retreat center. Maybe it is not 100% retreat because there are times of opening to be with people, to be with a partner or with the cats or with the mother or whoever is there. But here it could be important to know how much, but also not to be stubborn and somehow include people who are there and see it as a practice of integration, of integrating mindfulness into daily activities. And actually, this is what I want to talk about today, daily activities. And I don't talk about it because it's a special online retreat. I talk about this in every retreat because also on other retreats there are daily activities like you go to your room, you're dressing, you are going to the toilet, you are maybe helping in the kitchen for half an hour, or you are helping to clean something or whatever. Now, in your case, most probably the daily activities are more than usually because you have to cook. You have to prepare a meal. Most of you, maybe someone doesn't need to, and maybe washing the dishes, and so on, and so on. Or some people take half an hour and work, or an hour and work in the garden as kind of working meditation. And I do encourage to not see it as a disturbance. Of course, it should be in a certain relation with the formal practice, but not to see as a disturbance, but a chance for another kind of practice, practice in daily activities. I once did a retreat in Poland with Sadhu Vivekananda, and he was the main teacher there, and it was going for 1 month, and there were 80 participants. And because there were so many participants, they asked me to come and to help with the interviews. So I had interviews with yogis from something like 8 in the morning to 12 at noon. And the rest, I would meditate. So there was a lot of talking. And this retreat, when I think back, it was somehow one of those retreats where my mind was most clear and it was very satisfying. And I never thought that that could be possible. Maybe it was because I didn't expect it, because I thought, well, I have so much interaction there. But it showed me that yes, it is possible, even with several hours of not being in formal practice, but more something informal, more daily interactions. Maybe it might be slightly easier for those people who have already done several retreats. But on the other hand, it might be a little bit more difficult for people who have done several retreats because one would start to compare. Oh, how was it here? How was it there? How is it now at home? So it's both, maybe easier, maybe a bit more difficult when we start comparing. So when you compare, please be aware of it and just know it's comparing, nothing else. You cannot compare it. And when I do self-retreat, and I like it to do self-retreat, but what I observed for myself, but it's just true for myself, I take a little longer time to get really into it. It's a little bit more slower that the concentration is and the calmness is developing. But that's just for me. But what I also observed is that it seems to be more long-lived. It's not something that is, that I can feel that even longer time afterwards. So it's not about speed. It's not about how deep you can dive. It's just about how to use this situation for mindfulness, for growth, and for maybe also developing certain qualities that you can't develop as easily on a retreat where everything is given and where everyone does the same thing, like being self-reliant, like seeing where there are also certain shortcomings where you can work on. And it could be something like self-discipline, but it can also be something like rigidity where we are rigid with ourselves and think we should, and that and we are pushing too much. So it's about finding a balance here and also getting to know yourself, where you tend towards. What does it need now? I would like to give an example. I'm thinking of examples how people uh, maybe well-known or very experienced meditators practiced somehow like you. And one example that came into my mind is in Theravada circles, relatively well-known woman from India. Her name is Deepama. I don't know if anyone has heard of Deepama. If yes, you can raise your hand. No? Okay. Ah, yes. Okay, one, two. Anyway, Deepama, she passed away quite some time ago. It was probably end of last century, 1970s or 80s, 70. Huh? 90s she passed away. Okay, in the 90s she passed away. So, and she lived in Burma, but she was Indian from origin. And she was a housewife, and uh, she always wanted to practice, but somehow I think her husband didn't allow it, and then she got sick, and there was something. But then finally, she was quite already, I think, in her 50s or so, that she had the chance to go on a retreat in Burma. And she was very dedicated to the practice, and it seemed that uh, practice really unfolded very well in her, very deep in her. And it turned out that she really became a really wise woman. And then Indians had to leave Burma. So people of Indian origin were kind of asked to leave. So she had to go back to Calcutta. And then she was living in Calcutta in a very crowded apartment block, little apartments. She had a room or two, or not, two rooms. And that was it. But she continued to practice. But not just this, because she was already very experienced, but she started teaching the women at the apartment block. And someone said even who was there in this apartment, in her apartment, said even it was a very small apartment, but it really radiated peace and a sense of light. And that also shows how we can transform the place where we live. I have a friend in south of Vienna, in a small town, he is a very dear person, and he has been monk for a short time, uh, and he lives in such a small place. And always when I visit him, I also get this sense, oh, this is really a place of practice. This is a place of peace. It's like almost some kind of uh, in some monastery or so. And I don't know why, but something transforms the place. It has to do with with the person there. Anyway, this Dipama, she would teach the neighbors, but the neighbors had families or had to go to work. So there is said that one of the neighbors, she had a little baby and she had to feed the baby on the breast. So Dipama would tell her that exactly this is where she put the attention there, and she can be mindful of that, that when she feeds the baby, then this is her primary object and whatever she does. And then she had a niece, and she thought that at some point that this niece was ripe to go deeper into meditation. She was ripe for wisdom or for very deep insight. And the niece wanted to practice, but she said, I have to go to work and they don't give me free time. I have to go to work, no holiday. So Deepa Mama asked her that she still can practice. She said, you can start at 4 in the morning and sit and walk, do sitting and walking, and then you go to work. And when you go to work, try to be as mindful as possible when you go to the bus, when you sit in the bus, and whatever you do. She also gave a few tools for that. And then when you come back, then sit into the night. And the niece first said, no, well, this is not possible, but she was very motivated and she did it. And through more meditation, she needed also less sleep. It was not forced, but that happens with the time. And then, as it is said in this book, or someone described it in this book, this niece really could go very deep, and deep fruits of the practice could ripen. Even going to work and just using the little free time to really dedicate that for a certain time for this formal practice. So I would like to speak now more about the daily activities. Because in a retreat, usually on the third day or so, people already come, well, that's good and fine, but how can I integrate it into daily life? And then usually I say, well, you have a daily life here on the retreat as well. First, integrate it in your daily life at the retreat. That means, can we uh, can we bring a certain kind of presence and mindfulness into daily activities? And that's not being always with rising and falling or something as a primary object, but with whatever is at hand. Sometimes it can be more open awareness. There are different ways how to do that, especially in the retreat situation where when we are on our own and we do certain actions like washing up or cooking or cleaning on our own, where we can how we can bring attention to that. There is this well-known sutta of the uh, establishments of mindfulness that the Buddha gave, 4 establishments of mindfulness. And he speaks about the mindfulness of the body in very long and very many different examples, like being aware of the breathing, in-breath and out-breath, and so on. But then he would also speak about what he calls full awareness. And then it goes like this. Again, practitioners. It is one who acts in full awareness when going forward or returning, or acting in full awareness when looking ahead or looking away, or when flexing and extending, or one acts in full awareness when wearing the robes or the cloth and carrying the bowl or your plate, and acting in full awareness while eating, drinking, consuming food, tasting, acting in full awareness when defecating and urinating, and who acts in full awareness when walking, standing, sitting, falling asleep, waking up, talking, and keeping silent. So here this exercise is extended in a more general way to whatever one does. And there are different strategies given by different teachers how to do that. One strategy that could be used, Dipa Ma was using it, but I say use it with caution if you use it. And this is the strategy of naming or labeling, etichettare in Italiano. And I just once said you could use this labeling when there are thoughts that you label thinking, just knowing there are thoughts. Or when there's an emotion, to just name the emotions to make it uh, uh, clear what is there. But it could be also used in daily activities, in easy daily activities. But I wouldn't use it all the day. I would try it in a playful way, maybe for 5 minutes. That could be enough. And then maybe for half a minute when you are a little distracted and a kind of gathering yourself again. And one should use only verbs. So, for example, stretching the arm. So stretching. Or when you're bending, you say to yourself, bending. Or when you're getting up, you say to yourself, getting up. When you're turning, you say turning. One teacher I was teaching with in Czech Republic, he sometimes used to do that after the Dhamma talk, that he would kind of remind the people of this awareness of daily activities. And then when he was bowing to the Buddha, he loudly said, and usually one would do this just inwardly, he would say bowing, bowing, bowing. And he was getting up and he would say, getting up, getting up. And then he was slowly turning and making a step, and then he would say left step, right step, or walking, walking. And then there was the door, and he would say stretching, stretching. And then he would touch the handle of the door, and then he would say touching, touching. What comes next? Opening, opening, or turning. And all these different movements, it needs to open a door and to close a door behind you. Observe that. We do this automatically. That can be a meditation in itself, especially when you have time. Open a door, feel the cool handle of the door or whatever, then remove the hand, then make a step, then turn, then close it, then you feel the handle again, for example. And then when he went further, I didn't understand the words anymore, what he said. So this is something you could try. Uh, but please do it only in a playful way. Don't do it in such a way where you think, oh, if I am labeling now everything the whole day, then my practice goes wow like this. And then you create such a pressure and the joy of practice is probably completely gone. So that's one strategy, and it may work for some people at some time. But again, important is that you also know what you're doing and you're not just with the word. So that one strategy. Another strategy is you see if when you do things during the day, can you use the body as a reference? Can your attention be rather in the body than outside of the body watching? So from time to time, just to have the body as a reference, especially when you do physical kind of work or light physical kind of work. Or a reference of the body can also be helpful in the retreat or in the half retreat or part-time retreat when you are changing postures. And here we have another part of this text where it is said the 4 postures. Again, someone who is in training when walking, then one understands, oh, walking. And when he understands, when standing, one understands standing. And when sitting, sitting. And when lying down, one understands accordingly, however his or her body is disposed. And so one abides contemplating the body in the body, it says. Just the body. So, and sometimes such changes from sitting to standing or walking to standing, from standing to lying down, to really see, to do this mindfully. And one can start in the morning when you get up. Ah, getting up. You should really savor this getting up. I mean, maybe it's a little hard, but then it's not savoring it, but it's kind of just be with it. And for example, in the morning, I feel, still so tired. Should be there at the laptop before 6. And then the interesting thing when getting up, once I'm up, the tiredness is gone. It's not so bad. It's okay. So postures. That would be one possibility to remember the posture and to change the posture mindfully. Especially after you're sitting, when you stand up, not thinking now the sitting is over, now mindfulness is over, but you can bring it into other postures, but not so tight, again here in a playful way, and not expecting that you will always 100% be aware. It's more just remembering. Another possibility how one could, in a retreat, bring awareness into daily activities is to slow down a little bit, to not rush. And if you find yourself rushing, then it could be that you are somehow on autopilot, doing things automatically, things we usually do often. And just slowing down a little bit can kind of disengage the autopilot. A little slower. That doesn't mean that you have to pull yourself back in a rigid way, but sometimes just a little slowing down can help to bring the attention to what one is doing. Eating, drinking is all a possibility of being fully with what one is doing. It doesn't mean that one has to eat so slow that you need 1 hour for it. But again, one might be aware how the mind is elsewhere and how you can also bring it back. Now, interesting thing that I experienced when I was practicing with my teacher in Burma, with this Venerable Sayadaw U Pandita, who was very experienced and old monk, that every time going for interview with him, one had to report about what one is uh, observing with the rising and falling. This was the most important for him. And then other experiences in the practice. But sometimes it happened, would come there, and it was a very strange situation because one has to go in very respectfully and then to knee down and then bow 3 times, and he was sitting on this big chair, and then one would report. And sometimes he would ask something completely different. I was prepared for rising and falling and so on. And once he asked, what did you observe when you were putting off your shoes before you entered my room? And this I did completely automatically. I didn't observe anything. So I had to say, no, I was not mindful. And then that was the interview for the day. So next time, of course, very mindful, uh, uh, getting off the shoes. But of course, this time he didn't ask that. He just asked something else, just normal things. Once he would ask, "What have you been aware when you were bowing?" Ah. But then I was aware. I could say something. So it is interesting because it gives whatever one does somehow the same importance. And we should be aware how far in our mind we are kind of creating a split of what is real retreat and what is the others and the daily activities. So that's just to encourage you to also include it in a joyful way, not with pressure, but also here something can grow over the days. That and we might also be observing certain habits we have. For example, one habit that I observe with myself is that even if I have so much time, there is time to prepare the food and there's time to eat the food and to wash the dishes, and there's really enough time, 3 hours or 3 hours, that at times I just would rush, or that at times I would start one thing to do, but while doing this I see another thing to do, and then I do this thing, and then I see another thing to do, I do this thing. Oh, actually I wanted to bring one dish to the sink, but on the way to the sink so many things happen. So one thing one could also be aware of is when starting something, can one do it to the end? That would be one thing. And another thing is, especially also in the simplicity of the retreat, when doing one thing, can one really do just one thing? For example, when eating, can we do just eating? I mean, usually often in daily life we might talk with others, or we might read the newspaper or whatever. But here, maybe you can just eat when you eat. While when you are in a situation where you eat with your family, then I wouldn't do that. Then I wouldn't uh, be so rigid and say, okay, I'm now just in silence and in retreat. But then you can use the talking also as some kind of practice, and it might be helpful to know how much to talk and when it is enough, because sometimes it could go from one thing to another, and we're sitting 1 hour or so with them. That might not be useful in the retreat. So here finding also a balanced way. What's the time? So, Deepama, I just mentioned her, this woman in Calcutta, who was also teaching her neighbors and relatives who wanted to practice. And she really had trust in the practice, and that it really, if people are motivated, it will ripen its fruits in its time, even when there are certain um, difficulties, like one cannot practice the whole day, or one cannot practice in a monastery but in a small room only. There's a few quotes of her, and I may read one. Mindfulness can be applied to every activity: speaking, ironing, cooking, shopping, caring for children. The whole path of mindfulness is this: whatever you are doing, be aware of it. You cannot separate meditation from life. She did, however, on the other hand, say something like this: the great changes happened during intensive training. And then I cultivated them in daily life, and then they become deeper and deeper in that way. So I think we need both, and we need our times, and even if it's just a certain block in the day where we do have kind of intensive training, where you set your clock and say, now for this time I'll sit, and even if there's restlessness, or even if there's sloth and torpor, or whatever, I'll be with that. And or do the walking, or have a sitting, walking, sitting sequence. I find this very, very helpful. And here, even if no one sees you, no one knows that you are doing it, you do it for yourself. Yeah? And here you see how easy or difficult it is for you, and start from where you think that this is what you can do, and with the days you will see how it develops. Well, I think that's enough for today.